So we have breaking news for you. President Trump has officially signed an executive order to shutter the Department of Education as we know it. Now, before we get to the opinions and the backlash and the meltdowns and all that, let's watch what he had to say moments before signing the order.
Today, we take a very historic action that was 45 years in the making. In a few moments, I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education once and for all. And it sounds strange, doesn't it? Department of Education, we're going to eliminate it. And everybody knows it's right. And the Democrats know it's right, and I hope they're going to be voting for it because ultimately it may come before them. But we're going to be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs.
Okay, so how did we get here? It really comes down to two big things when you're actually looking into the history of the Department of Education. It was established in 1979, and since then, what has happened? Well, the budget is up to $80 billion annually, and we have produced some of the worst results as far as where we rank in math, history, and science. The second thing that's really killed the whole purpose of the Department of Education is left-wing indoctrination. Let's be real. Washington elites and progressive hacks are not focused on reading, writing, and arithmetic. They're more obsessed with pushing critical race theory, gender ideology, and revisionist history. So this move from President Trump should be a popular one because it puts the onus on the local community and the parents. Now, here is former Governor Sununu supporting what President Trump is doing and explaining why.
But we're talking about the Department of Education, as you just heard. Why do Republicans support the dismantling of the Department of Education?
Well, what's the value add? What value add does the federal Department of Education bring when you return power to states? And as a governor, I can tell you that's very important. And it's not just the money, it's the control, how those dollars are spent. All the red tape that comes with the federal Department of Education when it comes to special ed, school choice, homeschooling, charter schools, whatever it might be. Let states have those options. Look, I might disagree. I'll use an extreme example. I might disagree with Gavin Newsom in California on a lot of things.
What?
But believe me, California knows what their students need a heck of a lot better than a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington. So and this isn't just a MAGA idea, guys. This is empowering parents, teachers, that better communication at the local level, driving curriculum at a localized level for the needs of that community. That's it. So it's good. It's a great idea.
So there are a few numbers that I want to share with you guys that supports what the former governor was saying. First is the budget. Okay, we're talking about over $30 billion in the last 2 decades. But we rank below 30 other nations in math and science. So clearly the return on investment is not there. Secondly, school choice is popular. I mean, 71% of parents on both sides support charter schools and 78% support vocational training. And finally, the pandemic proved that Washington isn't the solution. Homeschooling surged by 30% nationwide post-COVID. So let's hear from the opposing view. This is on the 5, Fox News, just moments ago. Jessica claims this is all a grift from Republicans, that we really don't care about children's education, and that the children who have disabilities, we're just going to throw them to the side.
And when I hear Republicans out there talking about their plan for education in America, I don't hear them talking about making sure disabled kids have access to a public education. I don't hear them talking about impoverished
we're against
kids.
it.
I know you are. Thank you for admitting it on such a public forum. They want to end up privatizing it. They want a voucher system, which means that kids who can't get to those schools, don't have enough money to, or frankly want to go to public schools, won't have access. And they also have all of these religious kooks, like the superintendent of Oklahoma, who wants to spend millions of dollars on Bibles for the schools, Trump Bibles, because it's all a grift.
Okay, let's educate Jessica a little bit more on this. Number one, states already control education, okay? The Federal Department of Education is just a middleman who, through red tape and these initiatives, have enforced these radical curriculum changes like gender ideology, CRT, DEI nonsense into the classrooms. And what Democrats just don't want to accept is that each state, through their culture, their local communities, and what their belief systems are, they would know better than the federal government as it pertains to what is needed to make sure these children get a quality education. Now, here is the Oklahoma superintendent that Jessica referenced and what he had to say about this order. Watch.
Superintendent, thanks for being with us. You are in favor of doing away with the Federal Department of Education, but I do wonder if you have any concerns about potential interruptions when it comes to federal funding. Oklahoma does get a little more than the national average on that, because as I understand, you still want and need the federal funding that goes to education in Oklahoma.
Look, it's a historic day for America. President Trump is putting our education system back on track, putting our country back on track by eliminating the Federal Department of Education. Look, we don't have concerns. What we're going to see is less bureaucracy, which gives us more of an ability to meet the needs of our students, more ability to get back to the basics without federal interference, pushing left-wing indoctrination on our kids. So for us, it's going to be more of an opportunity to increase student learning, more of an opportunity to get back to the basics and empower families.
Now, I'm telling you guys, the narrative from the left is going to be President Trump is forgetting about children with disabilities. Why? Because it tugs on your heartstrings. This is what Democrats are really effective at doing to their base. But that's not true. And in fact, Governor Sununu actually spoke about that. Check this out.
But here's the pushback that we hear. And here's one of the facts. The Department of Education is prohibited from telling states how to educate children. That is in the law. They are not supposed to be doing that. And they only account for somewhere between 6 to 13% of funding. So they're not even the largest funder. It's state taxes and local taxes. But they do help with things like, free school lunch and those who are really disadvantaged, those who have disabilities. So and
they'll continue. So those funds that help free and reduced lunch, special ed programs, those funds will still be there. And I would argue potentially more funds because they're not being wasted on the bureaucracy. And yes, technically the Federal Department of Education says, we're not going to tell you how to educate your kids, but here's all the red tape. I'm talking like thousands of pages of legal red tape. The majority of folks that work at the Department of Education are lawyers. The centralized bureaucracy of Washington does not know what the kids in Minnesota need. They don't. And so they're trying to kind of make everything the same for everybody, as opposed to letting states and localities have more say.
Now, of course, protests did break out in Washington, D.C. over this, and it's the usual screaming and crying and claiming that President Trump is ending this country as we know it, and he's damaging the development of children, and he's leaving children with disabilities behind, the whole scare tactic. Let's just watch a few moments of that.
Say that Trump disrespects workers, that hardly suffices.
I fear that students with different colors of skin will not be heard when they're screaming within.
It is about dismantling public education so that children cannot get what they deserve.
She's spot on. Children are not getting what they deserve. They're getting CRT, DEI, and left-wing ideology crammed down their throats. They're allowed to use cell phones in classrooms. Whatever schooling used to be 30 years ago, that is gone. All right, it is not the same level of education anymore. And remember, it was Joe Biden's weaponized DOJ who instructed the FBI to do what to parents at these school town hall meetings? Label them domestic terrorists. But when we come out and say that people are vandalizing Tesla is domestic terrorism, Democrats look at us funny. Now, some Democrats, especially on MSDNC, believe this has nothing to do with education, actually. It's a more sinister plan from President Trump. Watch.
I honestly think this is more of this is just exactly what we saw with USAID. Frankly, it's what we're seeing with Social Security happening right now. No, an executive order cannot legally eliminate the Department of Education. But what will happen is it will be hollowed out. Sure. The Pell Grant functions of the functions of giving aid and support for students with disabilities, those functions will still be there. But will the bodies and will the people be there to administer that work?
Now, let's make sure you understand the process here. The way that the Department of Education was created in the first place started with an executive order with Jimmy Carter, and then Congress made it an actual department. And that's how it works. All these government agencies at the end of the day are created and dismantled ultimately on paper by Congress. But the President of the United States has the ability to shrink the workforce, change the responsibilities, control the funding, so to speak, but he can't on paper actually get rid of it, which is why what they're doing is just reducing the size of the Department of Education to only focus on common sense things like, again, children with disabilities, areas where there are gaps, things of that nature. Now, let's take a look at this graph. This is trends in American public schooling since 1970. When the Department of Education began, The cost per student was $57,000. Now it's $166,000. Also, reading scores, science scores, and math scores have not improved, but spending has. And of course, for the liberals that we know are unhinged, that are going to cry foul about all this, public schools will close. Absolutely not. The Department of Education does not educate a single child, and federal funding makes up less than 10% of the cost per student. Here's another one. Access to Pell Grants will end. That's not true. The Pell Grant program was created before the Department of Education and will remain in place. Administration will shift to a different agency, such as the Department of the Treasury. And the one they will be screaming about the most, American education will suffer, as if it hasn't already. But here is the truth. The Department of Education has not closed achievement gaps or made education spending more efficient. And by the way, students, teachers, and taxpayers are better served by ending this failed experiment. So the bottom line here is that America's test scores are in free fall. Federal overreach has crushed local education, and taxpayer money is being wasted on the bureaucracy, not on students. That's where we are. That's why President Trump is doing this. And if you're a parent out there today, you have to be encouraged, because now, instead of allowing these progressive hacks to take control away from you in regards to what your child is learning, whether you believe in progressive ideals or conservative, you'll now have more control. You want your child to be exposed to more progressive ideals? Go live in a progressive state. You want your child to have more conservative ideas? Go live in a conservative state. That is what we call freedom, and that's what this country is all about. So this leads me to the question of this video. Do you agree and support what President Trump has done here? And also, do you believe that Congress will pass the actual piece of legislation dismantling the Department of Education as we know it? Or do you believe they won't and they will fail to figure this out? Let me know what your thoughts are about all this in the comment section below. Now, speaking of progressive ideals, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu delivered a warning to the Trump administration. She plans to double down on granting sanctuary status for illegal aliens. You got to see the backlash and more to the story. So if you want to check that out, all you have to do is click on it, because it's coming up right now.